Prime Minister Mark Carney has arrived in Paris this morning to meet with French President Emmanuel Macron. Carney is seeking support from one of Canada's oldest allies. This as U.S. President Donald Trump continues to attack our sovereignty and our economy. This also marks Carney's first official foreign trip since being sworn in just on Friday. Joining us live this morning is John Kirton, Professor Emeritus at U of T, and also the Research Director of the G7 Research Group. Professor, good to speak to you this morning. Thanks for joining us here. The significance of Mark Carney, Prime Minister Mark Carney's trip. Instead of going south of the border first, he's going across to Europe, France, and Toronto. What do you make of this, John, this move, try to shore up allies over there?
Well, I think it was an extremely good call on his part. Part of it is protocol. When he's in London, he's going to see the King of Canada, King Charles, which is the normal thing to do. But the fact that he put France first, I think, is highly symbolic. On the international front, it's French President Macron, who has really been leading the charge in Europe to have the Europeans and their Canadian allies replace the United States in guaranteeing the security of Ukraine and of Europe, too, and indeed of Canada. The French just surfaced a nuclear submarine of their own in Halifax Harbor. There's a big message in that. If the Americans will no longer protect us, we've got allies in Europe who will.
Yeah, now clearly this is about what you've just outlined, Professor, but it's also about the threat Donald Trump poses to Canada, although none of the leaders are actually saying, you know, President Trump or Donald Trump's name. It's all very much sort of a wink and a nod almost. What do you make of this right now? The fact that, you know, the threats coming from south of the border are so real, but people are actually kind of afraid to use the president's name.
Well, that's right. But there are some signs of hope. If you just look at the recently concluded G7 foreign ministers meeting in Charleroi, Quebec, their foreign minister participated fully. There was a large set of commitments in the outcome documents where they did pledge their unwavering support for Ukraine. They only dealt with Mr. Trump's threat to Canada using economic force so far privately. But certainly Melanie Joly, who wisely has been kept as our foreign minister, made it very clear to Mark, has had you never, ever, and it's pretty clear that Canada will fight using military force if necessary to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to imagine even, you know, thinking about, you know, needing to use military force when it comes to the Americans. Professor Kirton, you know, we've got the situation here where, like you mentioned, the G7 just lined up, all G7 foreign ministers lined up sort of behind Canada. We're not hearing a lot, though, from actual leaders of countries saying, you know, Canada's sovereignty should not be discussed, you know, saying we back them up. The actual leaders aren't saying that much. Does that surprise you that we're not hearing a more definitive or defense of Canada?
Not really, not so far. Certainly in private, there have been many phone calls, exchanges amongst, now Prime Minister Carney and several of his allies in Europe and elsewhere. So they are getting their act together. But at the moment, of course, the Europeans are bracing for the fact that they're going to be hit next. All of them with his vicious tariffs we've had. So the name of the game at the moment is for all of the other G7 countries, because Japan's under the gun too, to come together and say, look, it's not just Canada you're bashing President Trump, it's all of the G6 at once. Do you really want to do that? Because this is a game you cannot win without pushing the United States economy and thus your popularity further into so it's 6 against.
Okay, Professor Kirton, we're going to unfortunately have to leave it there. We've got a bit of an issue with our connection with you this morning. I do appreciate the time. That is Professor John Kirton, Professor Emeritus at U of T, and also the Director of the G7 Research Group.